The first time the clock refused to strike 12, Daniel Whitaker realized the town had been keeping a secret from him his entire life. He stood on the empty platform with a paper cup cooling in his hands, watching the second hand crawl toward midnight, and then stutter. The hand trembled, quivered, and stopped a hair before the number. The air held its breath. Crickets went quiet. Somewhere in the dark, a dog aborted a bark midway, as if someone had pressed pause on the world. That was when the fog slid along the tracks like silk being pulled from a drawer, and a train that did not exist on any schedule glided into the station without a sound. It wore no logo. Its windows shone with a gentle domestic light, the kind you see in kitchens at evening when someone is cutting fruit and not thinking about being seen. The doors shooshed open. Warmth rolled out, smelling faintly of oranges and old books. Daniel looked around for a conductor, for a prankster, for a camera crew about to shout that the town had won a contest he never entered. There was only the quiet and the clock hand trembling and the ache in his chest that had sharpened since the morning he told Sarah he would be home early, and then wasn't tea, and then never would be again. "Are you boarding?" a woman asked, appearing at his shoulder without the courtesy of footsteps. She wore a navy coat with silver piping and a hat that made her look like she had stepped sideways out of a photograph. Her eyes were the color of steeped tea, keen but patient. "What is this?" Daniel said, too softly for a man who asked questions for a living. He didn't, not anymore. Teaching history at the high school had been his job, but grief had dismissed him from most of his duties. "The 11:59, she said. "We stop in Bellwether on the last night of every month. The town keeps us, and we keep time the way it prefers to be kept. Slightly behind, slightly ahead, never quite finished. I didn't buy a ticket." "You did," she said, and tapped the breast pocket of his coat. Inside, folded in half as neatly as a wedding invitation, lay a rectangle of cream card. On it, in blue ink, Daniel Whitaker. One conversation. In the corner, a stamped emblem of a clock without hands. "One conversation?" he said. "That is the fare." He should have refused. He should have gone home to the bungalow where the porch light still switched on at dusk because he had never found the courage to change the timer Sarah had set. Instead, he boarded. Inside, the carriage felt less like a train and more like a small museum built by someone who loved comfort and precision in equal measure. Velvet seats, polished wood, brass handles that warmed to the touch. Passengers sat in pairs or alone, some with their eyes closed, some holding photographs, some twisting rings around their fingers as if loosening storms. A boy of maybe 11 cradled a soccer ball. A woman in a red coat held a fountain pen like a prayer. The conductor led Daniel to a seat by the window. "We only travel one stop," she said. "You will arrive exactly where you need to be, at the exact minute it still wishes to be mended. You may speak one conversation into being. You may not stay. You may not change events beyond what can fit inside words. We run on truth, not miracles." "What happens if I say the wrong thing?" "The wrong things keep their edges," she said, "but a good word hems them." She moved on. The train sighed forward. The platform folded away, the town dissolving into fog, the second hand on the station clock still refusing to strike. Daniel pressed his forehead to the glass, expecting countryside or stars or some cinematic corridor of light. Instead, the window filled with kitchens, living rooms, back porches, not images, rooms themselves, sliding past like beads on a string, a father tying a shoe, a teenage girl cutting her hair with shaking hands, an old man trying to match a missing lid to a pot. The train was moving through people's evenings, through minutes. "Bellwether keeps us," the conductor had said. Daniel realized the reverse was also true. The car slowed. The window settled on a single room. It was his kitchen, a year ago, the evening that had divided their life into before and after without asking permission. He could smell cumin and lemon. The fan above the stove rattled because he had promised to fix it on Sunday, and then forgot, and then never remembered again. Sarah stood with her back to him, spoon tapping a rhythm on the rim of a pot. She wore the soft blue sweater he loved because it made her look like winter sunlight, the kind that arrives not to warm but to reveal. She was alive, not dream alive, not memory alive. Alive in the way of people who have not yet learned the vocabulary of goodbye. The doors opened. The conductor touched his shoulder. "Only one conversation," she said. "You cannot tell her what comes. You can only speak to the minute you are given." "What would you say?" he asked her. "If it were yours?" The conductor's mouth tilted. "I have spent mine, Mr. Whitaker. It purchased enough." He stepped into the kitchen, and time smelled like cinnamon for no reason at all. Sarah turned, and whatever he had planned as an opening sentence melted into the floor. "Danny," she said, head cocked in that way that had made him, the first week they met, think unfaithful thoughts about never needing to keep secrets again. "What are you doing in shoes in my kitchen?" He looked down. He was indeed still in his boots. "I didn't want to." He laughed, a sound a little too brittle for a room so well loved. "I didn't want to wake the floor." "What's wrong?" she said. "Has something happened?" "Everything," he wanted to say, "and nothing I can stop." "No," he said gently. I wanted to talk." She put the spoon down. The fan rattled on, faithful to its flaw. "Talk," she said. "This is either very bad or very good." He took her hand, thumb finding the small scar on her knuckle where she reached under a mower once as a kid because someone said never, and she heard challenge. He did not tell her about the deer that would spring out of the hedgerow the next morning, or the truck that would swerve, or how the man driving would sit on the embankment afterward with his face in his hands and say, "I am sorry," to the ground, because he could not bear to say it to the person he had never met and just ended. He did not beg her to stay home. He did not lock the doors. The rules were not made of cruelty. They were made of balance. Words could change what words touch. He understood that now as a teacher might. Content, context, comprehension. "We married too fast," he said, because he had been carrying that confession like a coin in a shoe. Always uncomfortable, never surrendered. "I pretended I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I learned what loving you meant by making drafts inside your patience. I said later to things that deserved now. I let work borrow us. I kept telling the future we'd show up when it started. I am so sorry." Sarah blinked. "Daniel, I want to say the words I kept saving for some night when the light was perfect and our breath matched and the world was quiet," he said. "I kept waiting for a cinematic apology. There isn't one. There is only gratitude and regret and the way your hand is small in mine, and nothing about that is small." She smiled, and the fan stuttered into silence because even machines know when it is polite to listen. "You know what my grandmother told me the day we eloped?" she said. She said, "You'll learn your oddnesses by scraping them together until the sparks look like candles." She was right. We were two people who believed we were good at solitude until we had to make space for someone else. You apologized with coffee and clean spoons and letting me have the side of the bed closest to the door. You apologized by staying. The rest, she lifted her hand as if weighing the air. We are drafts of each other. That's the point. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to say, "Wear the other coat in the morning. Take the long way. I'll drive you. Let's skip work. Let us stay in this kitchen and learn a new recipe and pretend the world is patient." But his lungs were not a law. The minute had a shape he could press against, but not break. "You remember the elm at the edge of the field by the school?" he asked instead. "The one lightning split right down the middle that summer," she said. "You are ridiculous," she said, and grinned. "And you are my favorite person. What's happened to you tonight?" "I got on a train," he said honestly, because truth had become a tool sharper than pleading. "I got one conversation." Something moved in her eyes. Recognition's shy cousin. "Make it a good one, then." He kissed the inside of her wrist, not a grand gesture, not a movie kiss, because that was where her pulse lived, and he wanted, for this minute, to be found by it. When the train called him back, it did so by reigniting the fan. The rattle became a bell. Sarah's head tilted toward the sound. The conductor was at the door, hat in hand, a witness who knows when to knock. "I have to go," he said, and for once it was not an excuse that meant I choose something else. It was a fact, like rain. "Come home early tomorrow," Sarah said, smiling, and then frowned at her own sentence as if some undercurrent had tugged at her ankle. "Or call me on your lunch. Tell me something unimportant." "I will," he said, "and let the promise be what promises should be. A bridge, not a blindfold." He stepped backward into the carriage. The doors closed. The kitchen slid away. The fog stitched itself shut. He sat without feeling the seat. Across from him, the boy with the soccer ball looked older than he had a moment before. The woman in the red coat had let go of the pen and was crying without hiding it. People cried on this train the way rivers run, naturally and toward somewhere. The conductor stopped by his seat. "Did you spend it well?" "I said the right small things," he said. "I wanted to say the wrong big ones." "That's what love wants too, most days," she said. "Right small things." "Where do you take us when it's done?" he asked. "Back," she said. "Always back. The future doesn't need trains. It arrives on foot." The platform reappeared. The clock hand relaxed and struck 12 with relief, like a door closing gently on a room that had needed quiet. The town breathed again. Daniel stood into a version of himself that felt taller not because he had grown, but because he had put something down. "Will I ever ride again?" he asked, surprising himself with the tinge of greed in the question. "Bellwether holds us at the month's end," the conductor said. "But the ticket you held was exactly what you owed and what you were owed. There are other passengers." She looked over his shoulder. "And other stations." "Other stations?" She smiled with a privacy he didn't feel entitled to borrow. "Between minutes, Mr. Whitaker, there are whole countries." She tipped her hat. "Keep time kindly." At home, the porch light clicked on because it had not learned yet about loss. Daniel stood in the doorway and smelled a house making night for its people. He poured a glass of water and held it like a ceremony. He opened the freezer and threw out the container of soup he had not been able to touch since the week after. He changed the timer on the porch light by exactly 1 minute and laughed when it felt like sacrilege, because the heart learns holiness in odd places. In the morning, he called the school and said he would be in before first bell. He took the long way. He pulled over by the elm that had been 2 for years and touched its bark. He said her name, not to the sky, not to the road, not to any god who needed names to find people. He said it like a man labels a box, so that when he needs what's inside, he will know where to reach. That afternoon, he stood before 28 teenagers who believed history was a list of dates grown-ups cite to win arguments. He told them it was a train that stopped at stations we carried in our pockets. "If you had one conversation," he asked, writing the words on the board as if they were coordinates, "where would you spend it? And on whom? And would you spend it on apology or gratitude or the kind of question that lets someone tell you the thing they've been waiting to say?" He did not tell them about the fog. He didn't need to. Several of them knew already. You could tell by the way they looked at the space between minutes like it was a door. That night, when the clock leaned toward 11:59, Daniel went back to the platform without a ticket because this time he did not need one. He brought a thermos of tea and a pen. The train arrived. He did not board. He watched faces in windows, a little museum of other people's courage and grief. He wrote a letter on his knee, 2 pages, ordinary paper, his clumsy handwriting, addressed to the man he would be a year from now. He told him to buy oranges in January, to fix the fan, to say small true things when big brave ones refused to fit. When the train departed, the fog left behind a smell of oranges and old books. The clock struck. The town exhaled. The next month he brought a chair. The month after that he brought another and left it for whoever would sit beside him. Some nights he was alone. Some nights half the town came as if a quiet festival had been declared by secret vote. People waved to loved ones they had already said goodbye to. People waved to themselves. People waved to no one and everyone. Daniel learned a liturgy for the station. When the doors opened, he put his hand over his heart and wished each person a good conversation. When they returned, he did not ask what they had spent, because some currencies are private, and anyway, he could always tell by their faces. On the last evening of the year, when the air held the clean, cold taste that makes people hopeful against reason, The conductor paused by his bench. "A word of advice?" she asked. "Please. Leave a note in the ticket box," she said. "Not to us, to the stranger who will hold your bench when you are gone. Tell them that the clock is kind." He did. He left it in an envelope, tucked under the bench where fingers would find it when they were looking for courage or gum wrappers. In it, he wrote the only thing the train had taught him that mattered. You will never say everything. Say the small good things now. The large brave things will follow or they won't, and you will still have loved well. Years later, when the town put a plaque beside the bench, Daniel Whitaker, who kept the 1159 company, people would sit with their thermoses and their pens and wait for the hand to hesitate. They would tell newcomers how the conductor's eyes were the color of steeped tea and how the car smelled of oranges and old books. They would say in that tone towns use when speaking of weather and saints, that sometimes the train takes you to the kitchen, and sometimes the porch, and sometimes the hospital corridor, or the edge of a field, and you will always think you need miracles, and you will always only need one good sentence. And they would be right. Because the station between minutes is not a place on a map. It is the small courage to spend your one conversation on gratitude and the small stubbornness to keep your porch light set to the time you are actually living. It is the soft correction of a fan finally fixed. It is the taste of an orange in winter, tart and bright and unapologetically alive. When the clock refused to strike 12 on Daniel's last night in Bellwether, the train arrived as it always had. He stood older and not undone, and placed his hand on the door he would not need to open. "Thank you," he told the carriage, the fog, the conductor, the odd mercy of the second-hand's hesitation. "Thank you for teaching me that time isn't healed by rewinding, but by speaking true while it is still a minute." The conductor tipped her hat. "Keep time kindly," she said again, and he had. He would. He did. The clock found 12. The town breathed. The station between minutes remained, waiting for anyone with a ticket shaped like a sentence and a heart willing to spend it.